This is Locke part two. So we're going to earlier sections of his book. These are kind of the things I typed in from my random notes in college here. This little sign right here, right there, I think I just highlighted. It's called a section sign. You have to use, what do you call it, insert special characters to get to it. It's pretty neat. All of these blue lines are because it doesn't fit conventional, normal standards of grammar anymore. All right. So in section 4, when he says all men are naturally in, and that is a state of perfect freedom to order their actions and dispose of their possessions and persons as they think fit within the bound of the law of nature without asking leave or depending upon the will of another man. A state also of equality wherein all the power and jurisdiction are reciprocal and on one having more than another, there being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the same advantages of nature and the use of the same faculties, should also be equal one amongst another without subordination or subjection. So he's saying that we are all completely equal in the state of nature, very much so like the introduction to Locke. We basically see how an introduction to Hobbes, it's very similar. So Locke is in a way building off of, inspired by, and responding to Thomas Hobbes, all right, about 30 years later. Section 6, when he says, but though this be a state of liberty, it is not a state of license, though man in that state have uncontrollable liberty to dispose of his person or possessions, but where some nobler use than its bare preservation calls for it. The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it. So let's pause for a second. Hobbes identified natural rights. Locke says, yes, we have natural rights, but there's a law of nature which obliges everyone and reason, which that law teaches all mankind who will but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possession. So this is where I asked you guys that question of, is there some sort of moral code that we all follow, right? Is there something that naturally tells us what is good and bad, and then we make our minds up? So that's where he differs. He says we're bad, but he's not as pessimistic as Hobbes, mainly because he got to see the Glorious Revolution kind of finish its whole thing with the relatively peaceful transfer of power during the skirmish of William and Mary versus James II, right? So the Protestants coming back to power in England. Okay. So he says that we cannot just do whatever we want. Sorry, I'm losing my voice because I took my lecture today for you guys. Section 13, that in the state of nature, everyone has the executive power of the law of nature. I doubt not, but it will be objected in that it's unreasonable for men to be judges in their own cases, that self-love will make men partial to themselves and their friends, and on the other side, that ill-natured passion or revenge will carry them too far in punishing others. I easily grant that civil government is the proper remedy for the inconveniences of the state of nature, which must certainly be great, where men may be judges in their own case, since it is easy to imagine that he who was so unjust as to do his brother an injury will scarce be so just as to condemn himself for it. But I shall desire those who make this objection to remember that absolute monarchs are but men, and if government is to be the remedy of those evils which necessarily follow from men being judged in their own case, and the state of nature is therefore not to be endured, I desire to know what kind of government that is. Small typo. And how much better it is in the state of nature, where one man commanding a multitude has a liberty to be a judge in his own case, and may do to all his subjects whatever he pleases. Wow, typos all over this. Without the least liberty to anyone to question or control those who execute his pleasure, and whatsoever he doth, archaic form of do, whether led by reason, mistake, or passion, must be submitted to. Much better it is in the state of nature, wherein men are not bound to submit to the unjust will of another, and if he that judges amiss in his own or any other case, he is answerable for it to the rest of mankind. This is in Locke part 1. Where he talked about the idea of why would we let somebody who is possibly evil and horrible be an absolute monarch. So we should have a multitude of people have to answer to everybody. That's when he says a judge amiss in his own or any other case, he's answerable to the rest of mankind. He also says state of nature makes us partial. So if we're naturally trying to carry out justice without government, we're going to do something crazy. All right. Now let's move on. Here are some excerpts that we already covered. Let's see. I want to go to the dissolution of government because this is really important stuff here. So chapter, holy cannoli, chapter 19, I think. Yeah, it should be 19. Of the dissolution of the government, section 219. There is one way more whereby such a government may be dissolved, and that is when he who has the supreme executive power neglects and abandons that charge, so that the laws already made no longer be put in execution. This is demonstratively to reduce all to anarchy, and so effectually to dissolve the government, for laws not being made for themselves, but to be by their execution the bonds of society, to keep every part of the body politic in its due place in function. When that totally ceases, the government visibly ceases, and the people become a confused multitude without order or connection. When there is no longer the administration of justice for the securing of men's rights, nor any remaining power within the community to direct force or provide for the necessities of the public, there is certainly no government left. So when government ceases to do its job, visibly ceases to hold its job, and people are just a confused mass without order or connection, and the justice is no longer serving, no longer securing our rights, and is basically not helping the public, government doesn't exist anymore. All right, and then he goes to section 220, where it goes, in these and the like cases, when the government is dissolved, the people are at liberty to provide for themselves by erecting a new legislative, right? Not just go into the state of nature, but create a new government, differing, has to differ from the other by the change of person or form or both, as they shall find it most for their safety and good. The society can never, by the fault of another, lose the native and original right it has to preserve itself. 221. Another way whereby governments are dissolved, and that is when the legislative or the prince, either of them, act contrary to their trust. For when people are made miserable and find themselves exposed to the ill usage of arbitrary power, we're acting based on our own opinion then, right? Cry upon the governors as much as you will. The people, generally ill-treated and contrary to right, will be ready upon any occasion to ease themselves of a burden that sits heavy upon them. They will wish and seek for the opportunity which the change, weakness, and accidents of human affairs seldom delays long to offer itself. He must have lived but a little while in the world who has not seen examples of it in all sorts of the governments in the world. My favorite part here, and then we're done with John Locke citation down here. All right. 225. Secondly, I answer, such revolutions happen not upon every little mismanagement in public affairs, right? Great mistakes in the ruling part, many wrong, inconvenient laws, and all of, maybe it's ruling party. I can't even remember. Probably a small typo there. And all of the slips of the human frailty will be borne by the people without mutiny or murmur. But if a long train of abuses, language that our founding fathers used, all tending the same way, make the design visible to the people, and they cannot but feel what they lie under, and see whither they are going, it is not to be wondered that they should then rouse themselves and endeavor to put the rule into such hands which may secure to them the ends for which government was at first erected, and without which ancient names and species forms are so far from being better that they are much worse in the state of nature or pure anarchy. For the inconveniences being all as great and as near, but the remedy farther off and more difficult. So you're allowed to have a revolution, but it can't be every single time something goes wrong. No. It has to be after many, many great mistakes. And as he says earlier, long train of abuses, right over here, and when the government ceases to actually do its job. Cool. We've covered John Locke. All right. Thanks, guys.